Hello, my name is Hanson and I'd like to tell you my story. Our languages are full of invisible trappings, common phrases that sprinkle the vernacular with most never questioning why we're saying them. It's all around us, these pieces of ancient worlds and lost civilizations that we retain like keepsakes of where we've been. Seeing a priest setting up on Saturday for Easter Sunday, the names for those days, the Roman god Saturn's Day of Praise, Saturday, and a day to worship the sun god throughout the pagan culture, Sunday, and of course Easter, the goddess of fertility and rebirth, is as amusing as a staunch atheist finding himself at a near miss with a passing car calling out to God for his good fortune on the close call. Most of these phrases are nothing more than playful ironies, either assigned to a meaning that's changed in time or have had the meaning stripped away completely. One saying that I use quite often, but not in the way that most others do, is, "If these walls could talk, the stories they'd tell." I enjoy this phrase because it implies more. It leads me to ponder some questions like, well, if they have stories to tell, they must have witnessed them somehow. Can they see? Can they hear? This would mean that we are not alone with our secrets. They're always watching and always listening, and they're not the only ones. In pop culture, a haunting takes place in a specific house or location because of a direct trauma suffered there by the living that usually left them dead. While this is true some of the time, it's not true the rest of the time because no one thing is ever everything all the time. In other instances, spirits top off at a location before moving on. Nomadic ghosts are more prolific than static ones, and we generally take no stock of them. They are quiet, unseen guests here and gone before we realize. Of course, in any group, there are troublemakers. Then, of course, there are those called upon to be there, and summoned spirits tend to be the most unpredictable and troublesome of all, especially when it's accidental, because who of us likes having our time wasted? My awareness and understanding of these natural workings doesn't make me immune to them. In fact, the more familiar one is with the mechanics of our existence, the easier it is to muck up the works, so to speak. My wife is more a part of that world than this, a minor gear in the windings of eternity. While most exist on the face of it to be swept away by the moving hands of time, people who are mostly human retain that deeper place in this world and bear more responsibility for keeping it balanced. But no one is perfect, and mistakes can be made. Not long ago, I was in my study and poring over books so old that I wore a mask over my mouth and nose so a sudden sneeze wouldn't reduce them to dust, and gloves on my hands to maintain the barrier of modern existence from the ancient world it transcended. It was the moment between late night and early morning when I do my best work and my mind is sharpest. For the most part, I am left alone in those hours. Sleep holds my family at bay, but the night when I looked up from a sip of tea, my sons were standing in the doorway watching me. I asked why they were out of bed. The morning was still a few hours off. They said they heard her talking. I asked who. They said their mother. I closed the book slowly, my hands trembling, and placed a plastic lid over it. I stood from my desk. On some nights, the gods have no mercy. "We don't have much time," I said. "We have to stay together, stay sharp, be prepared for anything." They understood, and while they wore their pajamas, they had put on their heavy boots and carried hardwood sticks. To understand our concern, concern isn't right. To understand our fear, no. To understand our stomach-churning, breath-stealing, flesh-crawling terror, you have to understand my wife. She was born and raised in primordial forest by traveling mystics. Her sisters were the Fae. Her mother was the sun. Her father was the earth. She grew wild as a weed and was taught to practice traditions predating witchcraft and druidism by millennia. For a while after our meeting and marriage, I lived with her in the wilderness. In fact, our children were born there, but I digress. I asked my older son what he'd heard, and he repeated my wife's mumbled words the best he could. The pronunciation of dead ancient languages by live young tongues was difficult, so I had to be sure. I asked if she'd said "Visho klumta vik" or "Visho klumta sick." While to the ear, the difference is subtle. To the listening universe, the distance between the meanings was a possible death and a certain one. He said he couldn't remember. We'd have to prepare for either or both. This wasn't the first time my wife accidentally conjured creatures into our home by unintentionally murmuring memories of her youth. We knew it had to be done, and my sons were already locking the doors and windows, all but the French doors leading to the south garden. Those were wide open, and a line of salt laid upon the sill to keep anything nefarious from entering while giving whatever may be inside an ease of egress. While they were keeping together to complete this task, I went up to my bedroom. I found my wife sleeping on her back, covers off, her body long with her arms at her side, palms up. Her legs were together, toes pointed. She looked at peace, a conduit between the here and there, not on either side of the veil, but the veil itself. I walked closer, entering the shadows of the room. It was cold, silent, only long whispers of her breath mingling with my senses. The ambient light that found its way to her was gentle on her features, and for a second I was lost in the beauty of my wife, the mother of my children and the binding force of our existence, and, once again, the thing that threatened to tear it all apart. Just as I was turning to leave, her eyes opened. It wasn't hard to see that she wasn't behind them. They were distant. Pupils retreated to a single-point singularity, leaving only light pools to swirl in their absence. "Hello, Mr. Oak," she whispered. Again, it was her voice, but she was not behind it. I said nothing in return, just stood as if nails were driven into my feet and holding me in place. The answer to the question I'd asked my children about how my wife had pronounced what she said was clear, and it chilled me. It was going to be a long night. I heard my younger son call from the stairs. My wife's head turned to the side, looked at the door behind me. A smile grew over her face, but it was distorted, too long for her lips, too many teeth in her small mouth. "Are those the little ones?" she asked. "Are those your little ones?" My wife's body jerked. Whatever was inside her moved through and into the room like a shadow of 1,000 bats taking flight. It was still fresh, too new to have a form, and clung to the walls and ceiling. I turned and ran from the room, down the hall. The shadows raced me, moving like floodwater projected onto the wall and sounded like 1,000 horses charging over muddy land. It knocked paintings from the walls, light bulbs melting and sparking as the spirit moved through them. It was too fast, not limited by pesky physicality like I was. I would not win this race, but I knew a shortcut. I turned quick into the solarium, knocking over my wife's chair, the table with her paint supplies, the easel with an unfinished work, pushing through the glass doors and on the other side, emerging at the top of the stairs. I looked down to see my son waiting below, the convergence of death painted on the walls finally catching up to me. I ran down the stairs, 3 at a time, almost washed over by my own momentum, hearing and feeling the approach of my pursuer, and jumped down, knocking my son to the ground. I held him against me as the black screaming shadows missed us and splashed down against the marble floor like a bathtub flipped over, its inky, thick form staining and splashing everything in its path. Then it was still. The only sound was my labored breathing, my son groaning, and the grandfather clock on the far side of the room ticking. My older son opened the far door that led to the east wing and looked around at the mess. "Mama's gonna be so mad," he said. "Hopefully we'll be alive to see it." I stood and helped my younger son to his feet. "I think I know what we're dealing with. It's a fluid specter." I huddled them close so only their ears can hear what I said next. I told them I had a plan, but we'd have to split up. I sent my older son to the basement for a globe light, a perfectly spherical illumination so bright that to look at it welcomed those negative spaces in your sight for days. I tasked my younger with retrieving a tank of acetylene from the garage. I took the exciting role of baiting the monster. I told him to stay away from the walls, only keeping on the floors as much as was necessary. They scurried off, light on their feet, powered through the energy of youth, fear, and excitement. I was alone, a bit of guilt lingering on my palate from sending my sons off on their own. I looked over the pool of black residue that seemed to spot everything in sight. The large pools began to swirl, ripple with life. 4 areas started to rise like hands pushing from the underside of a tablecloth. They turned to me in unison, identical cogs in a clock, tall, formless, draping death. "Your wife called, Mr. Oak." It was as if they all spoke, but none of them made a sound, the voice a biting whisper, winter's breath raising bumps on my flesh. "She wishes to come home, to be rid of you, to be rid of the stench of your cities and towns. She wants to come home, Mr. Oak. We've come to take her home." I tell them that she is home and that this is where she'll remain. The inky mess prickles like vibrations running gently through water, and the volume of the black spill begins to drain through the tiny spaces between the wooden planks and the floor until it is gone completely. Not one streak or spot of black is anywhere in the room. I'm cautious, unnerved, knowing that generally when a snake retracts, it's readying for attack. I walk to the umbrella holder by the front doors. My fingers tap their handles as I watch, listen. I pick up the large umbrella, feel its weight, spin it around my wrists. Then it comes. The wall beside me creaks, the plaster cracks, and it opens. The creature reaches out a heavy tentacle that I beat back with the umbrella. I run out of the room, down the hall, past the library, and down a sloping corridor to the south wing until I reach the ballroom. All the while, I could feel and see the summoned specter giving chase like a stain moving through the fibers of cloth, biting at my heels, carrying on across the walls, no limit to its form. The ballroom is a space in our home that has gone largely unused. It's designed for entertaining, not for those who generally prefer their own company. But it has been used for my wife's yoga practice, a greenhouse for curiously rare plants, and an open floor plan for my children's forts and other imaginative endeavors. More recently, though, we've begun to clear it out and rearrange so we can repaint it. When I passed through the tall doors, my heart leapt into my throat, choking out my breath. All the furnishings had been draped over in old white sheets. The light from the moon cutting through the walls lent form through shadow that created an army of raging creatures just waiting for me. The entity at my heel was now in the room. The doors slammed closed behind me. The black oil the manifestation had become began to soak into the sheets from their base, crawling slowly up to the tops until the weight was too great and they fell away, flat to the floor, inches from my feet. Then, curiously, music began to play. It was a stray violin carrying on stale air. When I turned to see its source, I found myself surrounded by shadowed figures dancing and talking. The lone player had grown into a quartet, arranging a waltz. A woman approached me with a beautiful, engaging smile, and what happened next requires a bit of understanding. When something from the other side crosses over, or if you happen to cross over while still alive to the other side, you'll find reality becomes fluid and control of it elusive. Like a dream that you know is a dream, you're at the mercy of the events regardless because your ability to simply wake up is a button that's just out of reach. She asked me to dance, and while my mind rejected the offering knowing full well the woman was not real, that the music was not playing, and that I stood in an empty room at the mercy of a creature from a place hell aspires to, I dropped the umbrella, take her hand, and we began to waltz. Round and round we danced with the other guests. The music grew louder, the laughter mingling with it all around. The music drifts and becomes undefined, just a hum, the vibration of everything. Before me, the stranger I hold in my arms now resembles my wife's familiar features. "Let me take you away from here, Hanson," she says with motionless lips. "Let's go back to the forest and shut the world away again." I need no time to form a response, but while my mind said no, my voice said yes. She leaned forward to kiss me, her lips now opening, revealing rows of teeth that ring around a throat as black as a grave. I closed my eyes, not for intimacy, but to escape the sight of my death. But then an explosion of life urged my eyes to open. I had not noticed, being lost in the illusion, that I was covered with the specter's thick black form. It was crawling up my body, into my mouth, into my ears, covering over my eyes, but the explosion of the blinding light drove it away. I gasped, fell back, looked at my son, my savior, holding the sphere of light in his hands. I wanted to hug him, but instead just said, "Run." My other son ran into the room with the large acetylene tank in his hands. I grabbed them both and went to the fireplace, flipped the switch to bring the gas starter to life. The shadows melted from the walls with urgency, feeling the pain of the light, eager to extinguish it, and us. I grabbed the acetylene torch and ordered my older son to take the younger out into the garden. I could see him looking between me and the approaching shadows, wanting to stand strong, stand with me, to fight, to be brave. And while I appreciated that, I appreciated it more when he took my younger son's hand and they ran out the back door into the night. I opened the tank valve and threw it into the fireplace. The flame ignited the gas and the tank shot out, igniting the loose clothes and drop cloths all over the room. The fire spread, bags of fertilizer and paper catching quick. In the blink, the fire was consuming everything, including the living shadow that froze in the light and burned in the heat. They screamed, turned rigid, melted into smoke. I turned away from the fire, cut off from the doors, my skin prickling at the burning lick of the inferno. Just then the sprinklers burst and rank water rained down, drowned the flames, turned them into a thick fog of steam. I picked up the umbrella at my feet and walked to the back door where my sons were peeking in to see how this all ended. I welcomed them in, opening the umbrella and holding it to block the water from the sprinklers from reaching them. They are quick to take shelter below it, and when we turn to walk back into the house, we see my wife standing in the threshold of the hall door. She looks around, sleep still in her eyes, nervously biting her lower lip. She flashes a weak, apologetic smile. "Did I do it again?" she asks.
Did you enjoy this tale?
Who? Me? Who are you talking to?
No, the listener.
What are you talking to them for? The story's done. They've gone on, haven't they?
Well, maybe not. Maybe they'll listen to us little grivels for a bit. Mr. Oak ain't the only one with a story to share. I have things to say.
What things?
Like maybe if they enjoyed themselves, they should subscribe or follow or leave a review.
Don't be telling them what to do.
I'm not.
It's not polite ordering those poor folks to do things, especially since they ain't here for you. They came for Mr. Oak, didn't they?
Well, how do you know they ain't come for us?
'Cause they don't even know who we are.
All I'm saying is it's good manners to subscribe or follow or leave a review, isn't it?
Is this recording?
Did you hit the button?
Oh, I thought you hit the button.
Oh dear. Mr. Oak won't be happy.